Okay. All right, I'll ask the question. You can meditate.
Okay.
The question that the Clarion County League, where's that?
There you go.
Yeah, Mike, we'll get it figured out, probably about 7:55. The question from the Clarion County League, how should the Voting Rights Act be amended to restore and strengthen the protections struck down by the Supreme Court? GT?
Thank you. Great question. I took the opportunity, I read the Supreme Court, both majority opinion and dissenting opinion. And I tell you what, I agree in both those sections where it talked about any restriction, discrimination, intimidation with voting rights is evil. That was a word that was universally used, and that's absolutely correct. I'm very proud that in Pennsylvania was not among those states or jurisdictions. We have done things right, as opposed to 50 years ago, those states and jurisdictions that were not. We need to revisit, and Congress has an opportunity to go back and look at Section 4 that was struck down, to bring it into the 21st century, to really look and see what is occurring today in terms of intimidation and restrictions of voter rights, and put in place some pre-clearance requirements that are updated for 2014. It was appropriate that it was 50 years ago. We need to revisit this for 2014.
Thank you.
We got it.
Oh, you got it, okay. I'll help.
I didn't agree with the opinion. I read both as well. And the Voting Rights Act was put in place to protect people's right to vote. And the fact that Pennsylvania just went through the voter ID bill, right? I mean, the fact that we're not on the list, I would say almost barely, right? There was a pretty concerted effort to restrict the folks that are voting in Pennsylvania. And it only just recently, last year, died, right? It wasn't appealed. But voting should be easy, should be accessible for absolutely every person in the United States that wishes to vote. I wish that every person in the United States would vote. Wouldn't that be amazing if we had 100%? But Richard Posner, right, one of our federal court judges out in Illinois, just wrote the most brilliant opinion on restricting voting. And he's a conservative thinker who, a few years ago, supported a voting rights bill. And he goes through every single reason why we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. In Pennsylvania, the plaintiffs admitted during the case that there was no voter fraud in Pennsylvania. It was a problem looking for a solution, right? There wasn't one. And so I don't know why we're having this conversation about restricting folks' rights to vote unless we're looking at the parties for whom they vote. And that's what it seems to look like. Early voting, why would you cut down early voting? It encourages people to vote, right? And that's what we should be working to protect and make sure that it's easy and accessible. My best friend works 12 hours a day. He has trouble getting to the polling place. Shouldn't he be able to vote by mail?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Response?
Sure. Well, actually, Kara, it sounds like you do support, because what the Supreme Court did was open it up to 2014. If there are concerns of other forms of intimidation, and the types of things that happened 50 years ago were unacceptable, literacy tests and all kinds of tests in order to be eligible to vote. And, this is 2014, so if there are, in 2014, other types of coercion, intimidation, voter suppression, we really should, that the Supreme Court probably did the right thing, that it's time to reevaluate that and bring it into 2014.
Thank you. What's interesting is what happened 50 years ago was coercion. What's happening now is restricting people's ability to go. So I think it's a different issue now. 50 years ago, people were being threatened with their lives. Now, their burdens are being placed upon them so that they can't access the ballot. It's a different type, but because it didn't look the same as 50 years ago, the court said, oh, it's not happening. That's my objection, because it doesn't look the same as it looked then. They thought it was appropriate to pull the restrictions from the Voting Rights Act off of a number of states that are actively trying to limit the number of people that are voting. So we need to address it. Thank you.
I would like to point out that we receive several questions that are very similar, so if we don't ask your exact question, it has probably been asked in another format or in slightly different wording previously. This question, it seems to me partisan politics is the #1 stick in the spokes to getting anything constructive accomplished. What will you do to alleviate such obstructions?
Thank you. I would agree with the question. Over the last 10 months that we've been traveling, this is the primary thing that people talk about. Get it to work. And what they're most exhausted by is the blame game, right? It reminds me of the case where you drop the glass on the floor, your mom walks in and says, "Who dropped the glass?" Right? No one cares who dropped the glass. You got to clean it up. You just have to do the work. And when I travel across the district, this is what people say to me. And you know, we hear, if you turn on any of the news channels, regardless of which way we lean, I'm going to own that for a minute, it's MSNBC is just as guilty as Fox, it's everybody else's fault. When I stand in a room with two parents fighting over custody with their children, we don't talk about whose fault any of it is. How are we going to talk about what we need to solve here? In my school district, we just settled a contract, and I found out that it was the first time in 25 years we'd done it without a work stoppage. I had no idea, right? I was delighted when I found out, but it's remarkable what happens when people get in the room and start talking about the challenge and how they're going to fix it, and that's what I'd like to take to Washington.
Well, here's my first suggestion. Turn off the TVs, because the partisanship that is fostered by the mainstream media to sell airtime is deplorable. There's a partisanship in Washington, there is. But can we get things done? We can. I'm one of the founders of a group that's called No Labels, the Problem Solvers Caucus. 100 Republicans and Democrats, evenly split. And we don't compromise our principles and values, but we come to the table and we tell each other what we can agree upon. And we use that the basis for cost-effective solutions. And it works. We have passed legislation that group has marshaled through. Every bill I write, including all those that have been signed by President Barack Obama, are bipartisan. That's a personal commitment that I have had from day one. Finally, Washington is broken. When you look at the 387 bills that are stuck on Harry Reid's desk, 98% of them are bipartisan. Washington is broken, and I can take you to the office and the Senate side to show you where that happens.
Thank you. Response?
I just pulled the numbers. There's at least 55 from the Senate sitting on Boehner's desk as well. Right? So I don't believe that all the blame sits with Harry Reid.
Never said
I
it did.
think we have four people sitting in leadership, and their only job in leadership is to coalesce their parties to compromise. That's their only job. And I would argue that all four of them have failed to do that. So I've talked about this for a number of months. I'm not voting for Nancy Pelosi when I get there. She might be a fantastic woman, but when I get there, we need new blood. I would hope that Congressman Thompson wouldn't vote for John Boehner. I would hope that McConnell, if reelected, isn't there, right?
Okay,
we need
thank
to
you.
do the work. Thank you.
Your arm's going to be tired by the end.
I know.
That's all right. It's my cardio for the
In the
day.
world of public policy, there is a time to vote no and say no, because there are bad bills that get proposed. There's about 5,000 to 6,000 bills introduced every 2 years. I'm not interested in Charlie Rangel's bill to reintroduce the draft. I don't think it's a good idea. My son, who's in the Army, he likes serving with people who want to be there, not those who are made to be there. I'm not interested in Representative Chaka Fattah's bill, who's a Democrat from Philadelphia, that wants to put a tax on I think it's only supposed to get 30 seconds. This is a rebuttal. So I'll hurry up and finish. Just being honest here,
Thank
one
you.
extra time. He wants to put a tax on every financial interaction. You cash a check, you take money out, you put money in, you buy something. He wants to put a tax on that. I hope you agree that's a bad bill. There is a time to say no.
Okay.
30-second rebuttal if you want.
Oh,
No, I think
new
we've.
question.
Have you done your 30 seconds? I thought you had.
I've lost track. I've lost
I
track.
think so. That's
It's
all.
all right. It's all good. Students graduating from colleges and universities are burdened with astronomical student debt. What can and should the U.S. Congress do to address this issue?
Average debt is $27,000 for an undergraduate degree. A whole lot more than that once you get beyond that. That's like starting out for many of us in here. That was what our mortgage was. Talk about starting in a hole. We actually passed legislation out of the House, out of the Education Workforce Committee that I serve on, and the Higher Education Subcommittee, that put a fix to that. It's a legislation that passed the House, passed the Senate, and President Obama signed it. It locked in student loan rates tied to prime, which is what you can borrow at. It did add 1% as a safeguard to protect the taxpayers because there is a default rate and the taxpayers shouldn't bear that brunt. There's other things we can do, though. I work every day in Washington to reduce the unfunded mandates. And there's a significant number of mandates coming from Washington on Clarion University that the university has to recover. They have compliance costs, and that winds up in the tuition bills. And then we need to support other tracks for success in life as well. Thank you.
Thank you. A few things happened in the last few years that were good for student refinancing. One is we brought up the middleman, right? We used to have a middleman between the federal government and the borrower that made money, right? In order to do the banking between the two parties. That's now gone. So if you want to borrow money, you borrow money directly from your lender, right? Which is good. I'm glad that we now have loans tied to prime, but mine aren't, right? Anybody in here who's still paying off loans that aren't in school anymore, a lot of us can't refinance because our loans have been bundled into securities that are being traded on Wall Street. Very similar to the mortgages that were bundled into securities and traded on Wall Street. Once that happens, we can't refinance anymore. So there's a bill languishing in the Senate, not going to get alive in the House, to allow us to refinance so these folks can actually pay back 10% of their income in school loans because we have huge default rates. They need to be repaid, but if we don't pay attention to it, right, these things languish. We now have more student loan debt, than we do credit card debt in the United States. It's a horrifying number that we have to address. Thank you.
Response?
Where do I get my 30 seconds here?
Oh, that's what I said, response.
No, I know. She was just setting the clock. Making sure I didn't get too much
Oh.
time.
I'll learn how to do this in another minute or two.
All right. Well, here's the thing, and there's two things that come to mind on this one. First of all, my first term, when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House, they did end any possibilities of getting through the private sector, our local community banks, student financing that was guaranteed by the federal government. I think if we had that back again, you're not forced to refinance there, but it would give you an opportunity to refinance out from underneath some of this debt. The other thing is, I hope you understand that also during that time when the Democrats were in the majority, they took money out of the student loan fund. The loans
Excuse
would be-
me, I'm going to interrupt here. You can stop his time. Last time I checked, Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, Mitch McConnell were not running for this office in this district.
No, ma'am, but this context
And
of, it was
we
let me-
are here-
Okay, I won't say names. Let me just say the Democratic majority, if that's okay.
We are here to, excuse me. I shut myself off too, but that's okay. We are here to hear what the two of you would do. We are not here to hear what other people have done or have not done. We are here for your ideas, your points of view, and your plans.
I will be glad to.
Thank you. And let's give Mr. Thompson 30 seconds to rephrase his response to that.
Just 15, because I'd used 15 on the other one. What I would do right now, as you pay your student loans back, that money is going to subsidize the Affordable Care Act. Not all of it, but a portion of it. That's wrong. I'm not going to say who did it, but it needs to be changed. That money, when you pay it back, should go to support student loans to make it more affordable and more accessible. Thank you.
Thank you.
How was that?
Better.
Better, okay.
You didn't get your 30
It's
seconds
factual,
yet.
but that's all right.
I don't know. I answered it first and then rebuttal and yes, no, I'm happy to. I didn't.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't think you did. Sorry.
30. I think we're at 30.
Yeah.
We are.
Okay, yes.
We are.
Technically, money that's paid back to the federal government is revenue to the federal government, right? They're free to use it wherever they need to because it's revenue back to the federal government. To be, brutally honest, the struggles that most of the universities in this district are facing are from state cuts, right? We have unfunded mandates, yes, from the federal government, but we have state cuts that we're all struggling under. I mean, the retrenchment that Edinburgh is going through, Clarion's going through. I mean, these are very real issues. It's why elections have consequences, right? We have to pay attention. We also have to look all the way down and talk about early childhood education. If we're going to talk about higher education, which is crucially important, especially to all the kids standing in this room, we need to have a conversation about how we're going to do it all better. Thank you.
I'm sorry for the editorial comment, but I felt that
We're fine.
I needed to make that comment. This has been mentioned a couple of times in other responses. The Affordable Care Act has been in effect for several months, and thousands of people now have health insurance who did not before. Do you believe that all, some, or any people should have access to affordable health care? What would you do to reach that goal? Gareth, you're first.
Thank you. I believe that all of us should have access to affordable health care. That was the idea behind the act in the first place. And I want everybody to remember that when this debate began, the folks all the way on the left wanted single payer. And the folks all the way on the right were kind of happy with how it was. And we ended up with a negotiated middle ground. The bill itself is not perfect. However, we have 300,000 Pennsylvanians that are now covered, that I don't know how we take the coverage away. And more importantly, we have women having access to women's health care for no cost sharing, which they did not have before. So mammograms are now free if you have insurance, as opposed to $170 for a diagnostic test. We know that there's a 9% increase of women seeking that service and getting diagnosed earlier. These are good things. We have to look at the bill, and we have to pay attention to the bottom end to the top end. Right now, if you earn $11,400, you're deemed not working poor enough to qualify for help with your health insurance. And on the top end, if you earn $1 over the margin, you lose any subsidy whatsoever. So that's where we need to spend our time fixing it.
I've worked diligently at trying to fix this bill, and 16 of the times where I voted for major fixes to the flawed piece of legislation, the Senate and the President agreed. We've got a lot more to do on it. What would I do? Long before the Affordable Care Act was introduced, 6 months before, we had the Putting Patients First Act. And I support that individuals should have access to quality health care. But, you know, the 200 to 300,000 people in Pennsylvania who now will have insurance, it's not access to health care if they have a $4,000, $5,000, or $6,000 deductible. Because you will be able to get preventive services. And I came out of healthcare. I worked 30 years in healthcare. Health insurance were moving that direction. Medicare moved that direction a long time ago in terms of covering preventative services. But most doctors, you know, if you've got a $4,000 deductible, you can't afford to go you can't afford to get sick.
Response?
I would argue the preventative services are what people didn't have before. So I know when I went to the doctor, I used to have to write a really big check. I don't have to write that check anymore because I have health insurance, and they say you have to cover these basic things: well woman visits, well child visits, basic immunizations, a yearly physical, right? These are things that are now covered for no cost that doesn't hit your deductible. So I don't know how we take that away. And I mean, there were a number of votes on the Hill to repeal it. And I don't remember there being anything in place as an offer as to what would be better or instead of. It was just not this. I'm thankful we're working to fix it, but repeal should not be on the table.
The replacement bill was actually the first bill that was introduced. Think about it. You're a single mom. You were able to purchase insurance. You got it for $250 premium, bronze plan. That's very affordable. Those are great rates of premium. But your deductible is $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a year. Where do people pull that money? The preventative services, you know, that's the best health care there is because it's much more affordable, it keeps people well. But what happens when you get sick? That's what we really have health insurance primarily for.
Thank you. Along the same lines, how do you plan to address the needs of the seriously mentally ill and their families?
Actually, the only piece of legislation that's passed the United States House of Representatives in at least the past 10 years to deal with mental illness is one that I wrote, and it was the STEP Act. It was specific to our active duty military and our neighbors, members of the Army, of the Reserve, and the National Guard. And it expanded the use of telemedicine, specifically telepsych, to be able to reduce the stigma of people reaching out for help. I worked healthcare for a long time, and I worked acute psychiatric services. And it's tough to walk into that bricks and mortar. And the STEP Act actually takes the stigma off of reaching out for help And through telemedicine, it allows somebody from the comfort of their dining room table to be able to have a conversation with a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a counselor. It actually works, the STEP Act, because we've seen the reduction in suicide among our military reduced significantly. Thank you.
The challenge we have, and I'm glad that vets now have another resource, but they had a resource available to them. If you don't have insurance and you're suffering from mental illness, it's very difficult to find care, especially here. The average wait time, if you are involuntarily committed to a hospital, right, because you threatened to harm yourself or others, and upon your discharge, you're stabilized on your medication, you're given a 30-day prescription. It takes on average 34 days to see a psychiatrist. I have seen people show up in the pharmacy with a bottle saying, I need this, having absolutely no idea how to navigate the system to go see a psychiatrist and get it refilled. Our mental health care system here in the 5th District, it looks like Swiss cheese, right? It's really, really great in the more populated areas, and we're bundling it together here. And we need to fix it. It's not simply money, it's making sure that people are incentivized to move here to provide the care. We're seeing an absence of people that are available to serve our children, our population of children. It's crisis proportions here, and we need to pay attention.
Thank you. Response?
Well, I agree, and it's all the above. Our mental health system is broken. That's not to say there's not great, compassionate, caring professionals working there, but the way the system is organized today, it has just failed. When you look at suicide, when you look at the culture of violence, and you tend to look at the perpetrators of those crimes, there's usually some type of mental health history that has been unaddressed. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of a bill that's been led by Congressman Tim Murphy. He's a psychologist from the Pittsburgh area here in Pennsylvania. And it really does a comprehensive overview and change of our mental health system. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Response?
I would add, the Affordable Care Act also gives you psychiatric care, right? It's now required. If you have insurance and you need care, you can get it. So it's another element that we have under the Affordable Care Act that we would not if it were repealed. So it doesn't plug all the holes, but it certainly helps us get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. The U.S. military considers climate change a significant threat to national and international security. Will the EPA's Clean Power Plan contribute to national security? Why or why not? Carol.
It will. It will. The military and climate's an interesting issue. They came to the House in the Thursday before Memorial Day asking for permission to use some of their appropriations funding to study climate. And their argument was, you want us to be ready to protect you when Hurricane Sandy happens and when the forest fires happen. We need to be able to study this. And from both houses, the answer was no. It was absolutely no. So the EPA is working to have a long-term plan to make our environment cleaner. And we just talked last night about how our greenhouse emissions are down. It's partly because the EPA is working hard to regulate the pollution that's going into the air. So I don't think we should be standing in the way of that work. And personally, when the military comes and asks me for permission to study something, climate, to help protect us, I would say yes. And I hope that our future Congress does as well.
In terms of hurricanes, that's Homeland Security. That's not the military. In terms of forest fires, I'm the chairman of the Forestry Committee. That's the National Forest Service. It's not the military. I support this if it truly will not raise the cost of national security. But if it raises the cost of national security, our troops, they don't deserve to have resources diverted from their mission, which is, and they're in harm's way and they need resources. Most recently, there's been layoffs among our military. That's, to me, is unacceptable. The military has spent $2 billion just in 2013 and 2014 on just looking at, not doing anything about it, just looking at green energy for ships and for jets. Now that $2 billion would go a long ways of supporting our troops who are deployed today and they're in harm's way, and their family members who are back home sacrificing. So I would support it if it's actually going to reduce the cost, But if it's going to drain money away from the mission, no.
Response?
Thank you. Well, one of the reasons the military is looking at green energy for our ships and our jets is because it's moving towards energy independence, right? If our military is dependent upon foreign oil to operate, that puts us in a real bind at some point, right? If the world becomes even more unstable than we are now. And the National Guard helped with Hurricane Katrina. The National Guard was present with Hurricane Sandy. They helped. They were there. They're being asked to step forward in ways that they haven't been asked to step forward before, and they want to be prepared. And personally, I want them to be prepared.
Thank you.
Oh, we're at our moment. Sure.
No, I think she had 30 more seconds, didn't she? No, she's done, okay.
30.
Just didn't want you,
Response time.
oh, she was flipping over, okay. The National Guard has dual functions. I understand that. Part of it is they're responsible, the commander-in-chief for the National Guard is the governor. And they're there for the state's use, and they're deployed for things during time of peace, absolutely. But we're talking about our U.S. military. And you know that we really can't buy things from foreign governments in terms of energy for our military, because you're just not allowed to do that. We buy American. The ships that are using coal, that's coal from the United States of America. The jet fuel is from the United States
Thank
of
you.
America.
Before we go to the next question, does anybody have a question they need to turn in to the runners here?
Turn the air conditioner on, please.
I think it's on,
They tried.
either that or... Yeah,
Now you
I
got
know.
it.
It's very warm. It's really warm up here. Is that better? Well, let's hope. Okay, we've had, there are 3 or 4 questions up here regarding minimum wage. I'm going to start with this one. And Art,
With this blower going, you're going to have, folks are going to have to speak louder for those folks back here.
okay. An argument often used against raising the minimum wage is that jobs would be lost. However, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 12 of the 13 states that raised the minimum wage on January 1st of this year have had higher employment growth than those that didn't. Do you support or oppose raising the federal minimum wage? Please explain. Let's see, I think it's GT's.
I did the other one.
I lost
Anybody?
track.
Which one's first? That way. Okay. They'll keep track
Thank
for
you.
us.
The states do have the ability to do that, and that would be a great question in the reference of if this was a question for, okay, we're going to try. This is a great question if you were running for the state legislature, because the states do have the rights to do that, and they have their own decisions to make and their own consideration. The federal government, the Congressional Research Service, has shown that there would be 1 million families lifted out of poverty. There'd be 500,000, 500,000, who would completely lose their jobs. That's destitute poverty, and that's wrong. It's wrong because there's an alternative, and the alternative is job training. Why would we want anybody to make just minimum wage? Don't people deserve a shot, an opportunity for better than that? And through job training, and that's something I champion, there are lots of jobs sitting available in this county. With the right skills, the right qualifications, individuals can do much better than minimum wage, and that's what we should be supporting. Thank you.
I would vote to raise the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, and I would hope that it's the first thing we do, because raising the minimum wage acts as an economic driver, and we've seen it, and I mean the statistics are. The states that have done it have seen job growth and economic growth. When people have more money in the pocket, they spend it. And more importantly, raising the minimum wage eases the burden on the social safety net that all of us are paying for. They estimate we'll save $46 billion in a decade from the amount that we pay to support the social safety net. 18% of food stamp recipients work at Walmart. And guess where they spend their food stamps? At Walmart. So Walmart actually makes a profit off of our tax dollars. I have yet to find someone who thinks that's the way the system should work. When we raise the minimum wage, people come out of poverty and they're no longer dependent upon Section 8 housing, free and reduced lunch. At my school, half of my students rely on free and reduced lunch. So the job training is terrific if you have daycare at night to be able to avail yourself of the training, which a lot of people don't do here.
Response?
Where are we going?
Thank you. I was at Clarion Bathware, great manufacturer. I was meeting with the employees, not the management, employee group at a town hall meeting. And their first question was for me, are you going to support raising the minimum wage? And before I could respond, they said, do you realize what that's going to do to us if you raise the minimum wage? Because when you raise the minimum wage, you increase the cost of staples, because that's where people make minimum wage. Gas stations, grocery stores. Your neighbors see that consequence. And there's just a better way. Job training, 200,000 jobs sitting open
Thank you.
today.
Kara?
Oh,
Response?
Thank you. Well, there might be 200,000 jobs open, but we just saw the statistics. Pennsylvania's 50th for job creation. So this experiment that we've been doing for the last 4 years hasn't really served us very well. We were 10th in 2011, and now we're 50th. So these jobs, and again, I come back to the clients that I have that work all day, don't have daycare at night to go get job training, and they don't have the money to take out loans to not work while they're getting job training. So they're stuck in a spot. We need to raise the minimum wage, and when you adjust it for inflation, people are earning less than they were earning in the 60s, and it's not enough
Thank
to
you.
live on.
There's a part of this question that I don't know if you're going to need the entire time to answer it, but do you think that full-time workers should earn a living wage, and what do you consider to be a living wage? Start.
Full-time minimum wage right now is $13,920. Just let that sink in. You can't buy a new car on that. You can't take your family out to dinner on that. You can barely take care of your family and pay rent on that. So yes, we should be earning a livable wage. And the economists have told us that 1010 is what it should be adjusted to keep up with inflation. We're at 725. The young woman that waited on us at Triple R the other day is making $2.83 an hour. When no one shows up for dinner that night, she takes home $2.83 an hour before taxes. I can't imagine how anybody can justify that that is enough for people to live on. So what happens is they end up being dependent upon the social services that we pay for. At Walmart, right, they actually help people apply for Section 8 and food stamps. To me, this is untenable, and we shouldn't accept it. If there's a way that we can help reduce our deficit, and which is now $17 trillion, by shifting $46 billion of expense to employers,
Thank you.
I say yes.
Got it. Thank you. 7% of individuals who earn minimum wage are sole family providers. Those folks need to do better, and we need to give them a pathway to do better. Minimum wage has been increased 3 times in the past 10 years. 9 out of those 10 years, the threshold for what qualifies for poverty has gone up. It has increased 23% from 2004 to 2013. What does that mean? That means that people who are making more money wake up in the morning and still find themselves in poverty circumstances. And let's say they pull out of that and they make 125% of poverty, 150%, 200% of poverty. That's still not good. We can do better by these folks by concentrating on education and training, providing them the skills and the qualifications for good family jobs, for a pathway to opportunity. And I yield back. I'm going to run the clock out.
Oh, yeah.
That statistic implies that when you raise the minimum wage, right, it causes more people to be in poverty. The poverty rate is adjusted by inflation, right? When things become more expensive, we adjust the poverty rate, right? It's not tied to minimum wage. Things are becoming more expensive. And when you don't adjust, we end up in the spot we're in. 115,000 people live in our district, fall below the poverty line. And a lot of these people are underemployed. They're working many part-time jobs. 64% of people earning minimum wage are women, and a lot of them are raising families. So if we don't pay attention to
Okay.
this, thank you.
Thank you. Change the subject. Would you support H.R. 543, the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act of 2013, that will allow veterans who served aboard Navy ships but did not set foot on shore to receive benefits for exposure to Agent Orange? Got that? I can read it again.
I got it.
You got it? You got it?
Yep.
Okay, you're
Yep.
first.
Well, I think the first question would be if they were exposed to Agent Orange, they should absolutely have been entitled to benefits. And if this is one of these hiccups when a law was passed, right, that excluded people that were affected, we need to remedy that. I'll admit, I haven't read this particular bill, so I'd have to read this bill to be able to dive into the minutia of it. But the logical first question is, if they're applying, they've been affected, and if their medical care is telling them that they need treatment for it, then they should qualify for benefits. But I'd have to read the entirety of the bill to have more nuanced detail for it.
Thank you.
I absolutely support this bill. I supported the Brownwater Navy. Those were the ships that were inland, on rivers, inlets when Agent Orange was being released. The Blue Water, the new bill is yeah, they were not inland, but quite frankly, those planes that were dropping it, those supplies that were coming in, absolutely, they should be available to get the evaluation to determine if the medical issues that they're dealing with are related to Agent Orange. I dedicate myself to serving those who serve us. I mean, we're an Army family. My son's a Purple Heart Wounded Warrior. My daughter-in-law is a veteran. They both served in Afghanistan. And I've worked hard for our benefits for our military, and I'm very proud of what we've accomplished. Our military and our veterans, the benefits that we provide are better than any time in history, but they've earned those, and they should have them. The changes we did to the Veterans Administration to increase access to timely care was long overdue, and allows them to get those services in their home community if they choose. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the clarification because apparently they were excluded and shouldn't have been when the bill was drafted in the beginning.
Correct.
So I'm glad to know that it's being remedied. Sad that it took 2 steps to get there, right? The brown
Correct.
water, then the blue water. So when the food stamp, when the Farm Bill went through and the SNAP program was cut, an estimated 200,000 vets were risking getting their food stamps cut. So let's think about that for a minute. 200,000 vets are using food stamps. We can do better by our vets, period. I'm glad to know there is work. I'm glad to know there is improvement, but
Thank
we
you.
should do better.
All right, now I'm going to be careful how I say this and put it in actions. I'm looking forward to legislation that undoes what was done, that cut the cost of living increase for food stamps. Food stamps were indexed through the year 2019. And back in 2010, there was legislation, green schools legislation, construction legislation that was passed where they cut the cost of living increase from 2019 to 2013. Let me be very clear about this. I didn't vote for that.
Okay, thank you.
How'd I do?
If I may.
I think we've
Okay,
all.
I'll wait for the next one.
I think we've done both of them there. Most economists agree that the current deficit cannot be overcome by spending reductions alone. Is there any place for a minor tax increase given this problem?
I don't think there is tremendous opportunity for increasing revenue. And it is both sides. You have to raise revenue and you have to cut spending. Our military, or the Joint Chiefs, have stated that the biggest threat to our national security is the debt. And these folks know threats to this nation. But I see opportunities for revenue that can be raised in many different ways without raising your taxes. For example, to expand the drilling of natural resources, both on Outer Continental Shelf and on lands, the National Forest, Public Lands, Bureau of Land Management, that you own as taxpayers. There's some estimates that we could, a bill that actually I helped co-sponsor, it would fund our transportation and infrastructure needs for 10 years from new revenue. There is opportunity. You need to address revenue and you need to address spending, but raising taxes doesn't do it.
So how many of us remember Deepwater Horizon and how much money it took to try to remedy? So I would argue that there are a lot of places we need to look before we look to drilling again in our waters with the risk of that environmental damage. GE pays no federal tax. And the reason they pay no federal tax is because there are loopholes built into our tax code that very wealthy companies with a team of lawyers carve themselves out. Think about that. GE pays no tax. So if we want to talk about revenue, which hasn't been on the table for a number of years in Congress, we need to start talking about where we close these loopholes because they're huge. We pay more tax than some very, 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 very wealthy people because they take advantage of very cleverly designed loopholes that are legal. The fact that inversion is legal, you're incentivized to move your company overseas with its jobs to avoid paying taxes to the United States. Right? This is where we should be looking at making sure that the people that are here and making money here are paying taxes here. Did I hit it right on the nose that time?
Sometimes it's a little fun.
We have a significant need for comprehensive tax reform, and I agree. If you're an individual or you're a business and you can afford an army of tax attorneys, you're not going to pay any taxes because you will find legal deductions, loopholes, in order to avoid doing that. And you're not breaking the law. It's symptomatic of a tax code that is entirely too complex. And it's wrong that people who are wealthy that can afford an army of attorneys should be able to avoid paying taxes. And so we have a great start on tax reform. I was hoping we were going to get it done this year, and it was a bipartisan effort. Unfortunately, the chairman on the Senate side accepted a post in China as ambassador, and it really put the process back. But we have made great gains, and I expect that in the 114th Congress, this is a priority. Because tax reform, we need to simplify, and we need to make it so that it's fair. And in the blueprint that I've looked at and that I'm supporting, and it's a work in progress, we'll do all that. And all I have to say is it's about time.
But the work of the super committee resulted in the sequestration, right? And the fundamental argument was over revenue versus spending cuts. So we've been through this, and because the parties couldn't reach an agreement on revenue versus spending cuts, we ended up with a sequestration, which cut everything across the board. And we're still living under it. So the farm bill that had good things in it, cut 7%, right? Are the food stamps that were cut in the farm bill, and that's what I was referencing, was $39 billion cut out of the SNAP program under the farm bill, was further cut by the sequestration. So there are very real consequences. The conversation has started, but until we own the fact that we have to address revenue, we're not going to get there.
Thank you. I think we got out of sync here.
Right. Sequestration was not a good idea. It was definitely not a good idea, but it hasn't been the final word. I mean, I'm proud to have led the first increase in a bipartisan way with a friend of mine, Jim Langman, a Democrat from Rhode Island. We achieved the first increase to career and technical education funding in over a decade. There's many other areas where we have increased funding. Sequestration is not a good idea because it's across the board. We really need to look at every program and look at, does it have merit? Is it redundant? Is it wasteful? And we need to go for waste and abuse first, no doubt about it.
Thank you. Well, I'm in a position here where we've just about run out our clock for the entire event. I would like to get in one more question. Let's make it one question with a short answer.
Okay.
30 seconds, answer, no rebuttal. This shouldn't take you more than 30 seconds to answer this question.
Okay.
Would you support a renewal of the Violence Against Women Act that protects all women? I think.
Doesn't matter, it's 30 seconds.
VAWA was renewed in 2013. It was scaled back. There was a version in 2012 that did not protect all women. It carved out classes of women that actually were put at risk by deputizing the Department of Homeland Security to go knock on the abuser's door and let them know that the woman had made a complaint. And that bill passed the House. And if it hadn't got stopped up in the Senate, that would have been the Violence Against Women Act that we have now. So I'm thankful 13 was renewed with better protections, but we need to be vigilant, and it still could use further amendment.
Thank you.
Absolutely. In fact, my record shows I voted in favor of supporting the Violence Against Women Act. I think those types of issues are incredibly important, and it's about safety, it's about security. I'm pleased to support programs such as our community, the COPS program, which provides money to local communities in order to enhance local police services. It's about safe communities, and I think first and fundamentally, as parents, as members of communities, that's what we want for all of our neighbors.
Thank you. I wish we could go on. I'm sure that Kareth and Glenn would prefer to go home and go to bed. I do want to thank all of you for your participation, your attendance here tonight. This is it's really wonderful to see so many people turn out for this event. And I want to thank all the volunteers who worked so hard on this event. First of all, from Clarion University, the crew from CUTV, the Young Democrats and the College Republicans, professors who encourage their students to get informed and get involved. And for me, especially, super thanks go to the league members, Catherine Holt, Donna Poljanik, Laura Occhipinti, and Janice Horn for all of their time, talent, and energy that they have spent working on preparing and presenting this program. Additional information about this election and about league positions can be found on smartvoter.org/PA, on palwv.org, and lwvus.org. Now, before we conclude for the evening, I wanted to get my thank yous in before we went into the concluding statements, because sometimes that doesn't happen. So before we take time to stop and talk to the candidates, they each have an opportunity for a 2-minute closing statement with, and there will be no response time on that. Let's see. You started, so.
Okay.
First.
Well, thank you to the League of Women Voters. Thank you to the College Republicans, Clarion. Thank you to College Democrats, everybody that's here. This is a full house. This is wonderful. About 2 years ago, almost 2 years to the date, I was filling up my car at a gas station, and there was a lady filling up her car next to me who called out my name and said 3 words: "Things are hard." Read that twice. The despair in her voice and her mannerisms, her facial expression, she was carrying a lot of stress, I could tell. Unfortunately, her teenage daughter came out of the gas station, and this lady didn't want to have that discussion in front of her. I'm hoping that 2 years later that my leadership, as your voice, your vote, your representative, assisted her. If she needed job training, well, we've increased career and technical education funding. If she needed access to job training through our career links, well, that's funded through the federal government. And I helped to write the Workforce Opportunity Investment Act that will improve that dramatically, and the President signed all that into law. If she needed a job, well, we got number one industry in Pennsylvania is agriculture, and we have one of the best farm bills that we've ever written. It's a jobs bill in Pennsylvania. If the fact that she was, couldn't hold on to her income, well, I'm proud to say that I helped make sure that 98% of Americans did not see tax increases, including that lady. If she was concerned about the debt and the impact on her teenage daughter as she got into that late Ford Thunderbird, well, we cut federal spending in a bipartisan way, first for 2 years in a row, discretionary spending. First time in over 50 years. Now, I work hard for her family, and I work hard for yours, and I really do appreciate this forum, and I would humbly ask that your vote to continue to be your legislator, your voice, your vote, and your problem solver. Thank you very much.
So I represent that woman, right? That woman comes into my office on a regular basis. And the thing that they're fighting most strongly against is economic insecurity, right? One of the leading reasons women stay in violent relationships, as we just mentioned the Violence Against Women Act, is because they can't afford to get out, right? They're not earning enough money to get their own apartment, to get their child out, to be able to put gas in the car, to get to and from work, and also pay for daycare. Men that are single parents struggle to access job training. I mean, we really have to own that for a minute. When you're raising a young family, and if you don't have a support system, which I hope everyone does, but we know that they don't have the ability to take advantage of these programs to go get training when they're working 8 to 10 hours a day and barely seeing their kiddos at night. Life does not look very different on the ground for the people that I've been helping over the last 14 years that come through my office for child support, right? I mean, I'm a family law attorney, so I see people at these very hard moments in their life. And when I sit down and do the numbers, I had a young man volunteer, does his National Guard duty. When he's done with his bills, he has $57 left over a month. And the kid doesn't earn $7.25, he earns $9.85 an hour, which is a pretty good job in Brookville. $57 a month after he pays for diesel, child support, rent, his school loan, which he got at a welding program, right? I don't know how many of us can live that close to the bone and say that we're doing better. When people ask me, they talk about the recession, they say, I don't feel like we're coming out of it, right? Life is not better for me. So I think we can do better on behalf of the federal government, and we can serve our constituents better. And I look forward to having the opportunity to do that. I ask all of you to vote. That is most important, that we vote next Tuesday. I'd ask you for a vote for me, because I believe that we can shake Washington up and get Congress back to work for us. Thank you.
And their bell.
Thank you for your applause for our candidates and for your civility and your participation. Please take some time now to talk to the candidates, to talk to the students, to talk to the league members, to have some refreshments. Fan yourself.
You mentioned
And
cookies.
remember, vote on Tuesday. Nothing is more important than that.